Have you ever been invited to dinner and just knew it wasn't really about the food? That's what happened to me. No subject line, no explanation, just an email from HR. Dinner with the Donnellys, Friday 7 p.m. No agenda, just a little smiley face at the end like it was supposed to make it feel warm. But I've been at Stratison Analytics for 22 years. I know how things shift before they collapse. And something about that invitation felt final. I'm Eva. I was the first person Doug Donnelly ever hired. Back then, the office was a rented warehouse and a coffee machine that groaned louder than any of us. There were 3 of us total. No investors, no titles, just long hours and blind hope. I wasn't hired to lead or inspire or innovate. I was hired to survive, and I did for all of us. When we couldn't afford a CFO, I handled the books. When our biggest client threatened to leave, I flew out overnight with a contract in hand. When the server melted down at midnight, I stayed until it breathed again. Doug used to call me the quiet engine. I didn't need recognition, just a place to do the work, but lately, I'd felt something changing. My updates stopped getting replies. Our Monday check-ins became, "Let's touch base later." Then came Harper, Doug's daughter, fresh from a Stanford program, all sharp suits and sharper smiles. She spoke in slogans, future-ready vision too, through digital first, but never once asked about the backbone that held it all up. So when the invite came, I knew what it was. Not a thank you, not a conversation, a curtain call. I still went. I wanted to look them in the eye. I wore a navy blouse, pearl earrings my daughter gave me last Mother's Day. Nothing flashy, just me. The restaurant was one of those places with low lights and small plates and high expectations. Doug stood when I arrived. "Eva," he said, like we hadn't grown silent in the last 6 months. His wife smiled gently. Harper looked like she'd rehearsed every line. Dinner was pleasant enough at first. Harper asked about the early days. Said it was cute imagining us in a garage. I smiled. It wasn't cute back then. Doug cleared his throat. "Eva saved this company twice. That defense contract, her doing." Harper nodded. "Every company needs its building blocks." And there it was. Doug folded his hands. "Harper will shadow you 6 weeks, then we'll transition." Then Harper added softly, but clearly, "Time to step aside, Granny. Let us take it from here." I looked at her for a long second. Then I smiled, because what they didn't know was that I still owned 5% of this company, and I never forgot. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, though I probably should have been, and not because of what Harper said, though. Her words hung in the air like smoke. I stayed up because something in me had shifted. Quietly. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was clarity. After 2 decades of giving everything I had to this company, more than just hours, more than just work, I realized something. They were already counting me out, rewriting the story without my name in it. And that's when I remembered the paper. It was 2003. Stratison was hanging by a thread. We had 2 weeks of cash left, one client halfway out the door, and Doug hadn't slept in 3 nights. I just pulled an all-nighter, patching a billing error that nearly lost us our last major contract. At 7:15 a.m., Doug walked into my office, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled, and dropped a single sheet of paper on my desk. "I can't pay you what you deserve right now," he said, "but I want you to have a piece of this." I looked at it, barely skimmed the language. I was exhausted. Loyal, hopeful, I signed without asking questions. At the time, it felt like a gesture, like a thank you card dressed up as legalese. And for years, that's all it was to me. But then the investors came, the money, the lawyers, the paperwork. One afternoon, I handed the document to an attorney friend just to double-check my employment contracts. She flipped through the pages, paused and raised an eyebrow. "Eva, this isn't ceremonial. This is real equity. 5% with voting rights. I remember blinking. Wait, seriously? She nodded. You have more power in this company than you realize. Still, I never used it. Never brought it up because I believed I didn't need to. I believed that loyalty would speak for itself, that history mattered, that being there from the beginning meant something. So I kept it tucked away quiet, like everything else I'd ever done. But last night changed that. Doug had looked me in the eye and handed over my role like it was a passing phase. Harper had smiled like my years of service were a cute anecdote they forgot. Or maybe they never bothered to remember. But I did. I walked into my home office, opened the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet, and pulled out the original agreement. Still creased, still signed. Then I sat down at my desk, took a deep breath, and began to read it like it was the first time, because the moment they pushed me out was the moment I remembered exactly what I was still holding. I didn't tell anyone about the equity document. Not yet. I needed to sit with it first. Let it settle. It had been nearly 2 decades since I signed that page, and even holding it again felt surreal. But the more I read it, the more I remembered who I used to be, the version of me who believed that loyalty was a kind of currency, that if you gave enough of yourself, people wouldn't forget. That illusion shattered the moment my phone rang the next afternoon. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut told me to pick up Eva. The voice was low, careful. It's Daniela. I blinked. It had been years. Daniela had been Stratison's head of legal. During our growth phase, sharp, meticulous, always 2 steps ahead. She left after our Series B funding round quietly and without much explanation. Hey, I said, surprised. It's been a while, I know. I've been watching from a distance, she said. I saw the press photo last quarter. Harper at the center. You weren't even mentioned. My grip on the phone tightened. No, I wasn't. There was a pause, then Daniela dropped her voice even lower. Eva, I need to tell you something. Back in late 2020, Doug brought in a separate legal team. Not internal counsel. External quiet. Their job was to streamline the equity ledger. I stayed silent. My chest went still. They were digging through old agreements, looking for any remaining legacy shares. Anything unsigned, unclear, or forgotten. Your name came up. Multiple times. I swallowed, and I left before it went further, she said. But I remember one of the partners saying something about cleansing the ownership trail before acquisition readiness. Eva, they were planning to erase you. The air left my lungs. Not just push me out, erase me. My hand shook slightly as I hung up. And then I moved. I pulled out every file box I had. Old contracts, amendments, archived emails, anything with signatures, anything notarized. I started lining them up on the living room floor. Each one a breadcrumb from a version of me. They were hoping no one remembered. They thought if they kept everything quiet enough, polite enough, I wouldn't ask questions. But they forgot who built the system that tracked legal records, who signed off on the first compliance process, who trained the original counsel on what counted, what didn't, and how to cover tracks. It was me. They weren't just cutting me out of a seat. They were trying to rewrite the foundation I helped lay. And no matter how gently they served the message, I wasn't going to let them bury it. I scanned the equity agreement, then pulled up the earliest version of our corporate charter line by line. I checked dates, clauses, merger conditions. The more I dug, the more I realized they hadn't just underestimated me. They'd forgotten I was the one who built the walls they were trying to paint over. That night, I opened a new folder on my desktop. I labeled it, Hold the Line, because they were moving fast. But now, so was I. Monday morning came with its usual hush. The kind of hush that settles over an office when people sense change, but aren't brave enough to name it. I stepped in at 8:30 like always. Same coffee in hand, same corner office. But something in the air had shifted. Not loud, just subtle. Emails came slower. Eye contact shorter. Like I was still there, but only technically. And then she appeared. Harper Donnelly walked into my office without knocking. She carried 2 coffees and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thought I'd bring you one," she said cheerfully, placing the extra cup on my desk like it was an olive branch. I looked up from my screen. "You found the good beans," I said. She laughed. "Figured I should learn how you take it. Since we'll be working so closely over the next few weeks." I nodded slowly. "Of course, you're shadowing." She sat down across from me, crossed her legs like she was settling into her own space. "I've been diving into the company archives," she said. "So much cool stuff. The early projects, the old infrastructure. It's wild seeing how far things have come." "That's one way to put it," I replied. "I mean," she continued, "there's so much room to modernize, digitize, clean up old code, unify systems, simplify the vendor chain. Honestly, I'm excited." I tilted my head. Excitement is good. Just be careful not to mistake complexity for mess. Some of those old systems are what kept us afloat during 3 separate crashes. She smiled all gloss and no warmth. "Of course, but we can't let nostalgia hold us back, right?" There it was, the script, delivered in casual tone, polished delivery. I could see the PR coaching written all over it. She leaned back in her chair, eyeing the layout of my office. "Do you always review budget requests manually?" I kept my expression neutral. "Always. It catches what automation misses. Our legacy clients operate on platforms that predate your cloud tools, garbage in, garbage out." She blinked, clearly thrown. "Right," she said, masking it with another smile. "Just trying to learn how you do things," I smiled back. "Then you're off to a good start." She stood, brushing imaginary lint from her sleeve. "We've got a leadership strategy meeting at 10. I'm putting together the invite list." Something in the way she said it made me pause. "Make sure you loop me in," I said. She nodded once. "Of course, but the invite never came." Luis forwarded it to me later that morning. Subject line Vision 2. Stratosyn's future begins now. I scrolled down. Every executive was on the list. Except me. I stared at the screen for a while. Not angry, just noting it. They were testing the boundaries. Seeing how quietly I'd let them erase me. I didn't say anything. Didn't barge into the meeting. I let it happen. Because sometimes letting someone hang themselves with their own rope is more powerful than yanking it from their hands. Later that day, I passed Harper in the hallway. She smiled like nothing had happened. "Hey," she said casually. "Hope your morning was productive." "It was," I said, pausing. "And yours." "Oh, great. The team's aligned. Lots of momentum." "Good," I replied. "You'll need it." She blinked. "Sorry." I gave her a look so calm, it unnerved her. Momentum's important, especially when you don't know what's waiting around the corner. That stopped her smile just for a beat. I walked past her without looking back. Because here's what no one told her. I don't need to sit in the room to influence it. I built this place, the systems, the relationships, the habits people don't even realize they follow. My signature may not be on every new policy, but my fingerprints are in the foundation. They think I'm disappearing quietly, but I'm not disappearing. I'm watching, calculating, still here. And when the time comes, they'll wish I had walked away. The thing about systems is, they remember, people forget, faces fade, titles change, but systems, if you've built them right, hold on to the truth long after everyone's moved on. And that's why on a quiet Wednesday morning, I found myself walking down to the basement of Stratosyn's original server room, the one no one uses anymore. At least that's what they think. The lights flickered once, twice, then settled into a dull hum. It smelled like dust and old cooling fans, but to me it was familiar, like an old friend who never asked questions. That's where I found Ben. He was crouched by a steel rack, unplugging a labeled Ethernet cable with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Same Ben as always, meticulous, quiet, and so deeply loyal, it never needed to be said out loud. "Didn't expect to see you down here," he said without looking up. "I could say the same," I replied. He stood, brushed his palms against his worn cargo pants, and gave me the kind of nod only people who've worked through midnight crashes and near bankruptcies can give. "Got a heads up," he said. "Thought I'd take a look before they start gutting the place." "What do you mean?" He motioned to the empty rack behind him. 2 of the backup servers were removed yesterday. No notice, no transfer, just gone. My heart stilled. "Gone Harper's directive," he said. "Said they're draining power and outdated." I let the silence hang. Those servers weren't just backup. They were the heartbeat beneath the shine, legacy data. Audit trails, version logs for over a decade of client infrastructure. They were the systems of last resort when the cloud hiccuped or a deployment broke something deep and old. She didn't know what she was pulling apart. Or worse, she didn't care. Ben looked at me. "I thought you should know before more goes missing." I placed a hand on the cool metal panel beside me. "Thanks, Ben. You still have access to the auxiliary console." He smirked. "You think I'd leave without a copy?" I exhaled. "Good. Then we'll need to do a full mirror backup." Quietly. Ben tilted his head. "Still got someone upstairs, Luis," I said. "He'll root through the DevOps sandbox. No alerts." Ben nodded. "I'll get it started." As I made my way back up the stairs, I felt a chill. Not from the temperature, but from the realization Harper wasn't just cutting costs. She was cutting history. She was dismantling the invisible scaffolding that had kept Stratosyn stable through every storm. She thought shiny dashboards were enough. But the company wasn't built on dashboards. It was built in rooms like that basement, with people like Ben, and people like me. By mid-afternoon, Louis stopped by my office. No knock. Just a post-it on my monitor that read, "Transfer in progress, ETA 18 hours. No flags." I smiled. Harper didn't know it yet, but the system she thought she was upgrading. It was already slipping out from under her feet. Later that day, I passed by the IT team's floor. Harper was there smiling, asking about faster integrations and reducing hardware overhead. I didn't interrupt, I just listened. She was speaking confidently about how Stratosyn could shed the outdated parts of its past. The 8 lead nodded, but I could see it in his eyes. He was humoring her, because they all knew. You don't rip out your foundation and expect the walls to hold. You reinforce, you adapt. You respect the structure before you change the surface. But Harper didn't see that. She only saw legacy as weight, and she forgot that some weight is what keeps a building standing. That night I checked the backup log from home. Everything was syncing as planned. Clean, invisible, complete. And as I sipped my tea, I thought, she's building a new house on a foundation she doesn't understand, but I still have the blueprints. And now, I have the backup too. By Thursday morning, the backup was complete. Every system Harper didn't understand. Every line of legacy code she dismissed as inefficient was now safely mirrored and stored. Quietly, invisibly. Just as it should be. I thought I'd feel relieved. Maybe even proud. Instead, I just felt cold because I was starting to see the full picture now. The technical erasure was just one layer. The deeper cut was coming from somewhere else. That's when the draft brochure landed on my desk. No sender. Just an anonymous inter-office envelope with the label Stratosyn Internal Rebrand, Phase 1 Preview. I opened it slowly, a clean, modern layout. Big bold fonts, buzzwords floating in carefully chosen pastels. Words like evolution, fresh vision, next generation leadership. Faces of new department heads smiling under perfect lighting. And then I turned to the page titled, Our Founding Story. I wasn't there. Not a mention, not a quote, not even a line at the bottom. Doug's photo was there. Younger filtered, framed by language that made it sound like the company had emerged from his solo genius. But the truth? Stratosyn was never a one-man vision. We were 3 people, and one of them was me. I flipped back through the pages, checking again slower this time. Nothing. Not my name, not my title, not even my initials. It wasn't a rebrand. It was a rewrite, and I knew exactly who had signed off on it. I walked down to the PR floor. Calm, even steps. I didn't slam the door or raise my voice. I didn't need to. Jared, the head of communications, was hovering over a layout board, sticky notes scattered across his screen. He looked up when he saw me, the color draining just slightly from his face. Eva, he said, hey, I didn't realize I held up the brochure. Is this final? His mouth opened, then closed. It's a draft, internal only. I waited, he swallowed. Harper's been working closely with us. She wanted a refreshed narrative for the new branding cycle. And that includes removing my name from the company's founding history. I asked, my tone even. He shifted in his seat. She thought it might confuse the message. She wanted to emphasize forward momentum. I tilted my head. You mean she wanted it to look like the company began and ends with her father? Jared looked down. It wasn't personal. I let that sit there for a second. Let him feel the weight of it. Then I smiled, not cruel, just tired. You know the internal video? The one Harper's planning to release at the All Hands next month? He nodded quickly. Yeah, we're still finalizing the voiceover. The first 2 segments are already done. They're my voice, I said quietly. Recorded last year. Remember, for the anniversary campaign? His eyes widened. Yes, yes. I remember. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folder. Inside a signed usage agreement. My signature. His signature. A clause on limited duration rights. I still hold the copyright, I said gently. So if my name isn't in the history, you'll need to re-record those parts. Or pull the video entirely. He stared at the page mouth, slightly open. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. I tucked the folder back into my bag, gave him a light nod, and left the room. No confrontation. No dramatics, just precision. Because they thought removing my name from a document could erase the work. They forgot my voice is still in the walls. My fingerprint is in the contracts, and now it's in the audio files they forgot to check. Let them edit, let them cut, and crop, and rearrange. I'm not fighting to be seen. I'm reminding them. I never left. By the end of that week, something shifted. Not on the surface, not in headlines or formal memos. But under it all, beneath the forced smiles, the quiet meetings, the branded lingo, there was a subtle change in air pressure. It started with a message. No name, no signature. Just a single sentence on a sticky note left at my desk. If you're still here, I haven't given up. I held it in my hand for a long time, folded it once, then slid it into the side pocket of my bag. An hour later, I got an email from someone in finance, private, untraceable. She doesn't know how the actual billing system works. You do. That same afternoon, a junior developer, someone I trained 3 years ago, bumped into me in the hall. On purpose. Can I ask you something? He said quietly, eyes darting. If Harper starts changing the deployment schedule, who's reviewing the rollback protocols? I looked at him, then simply said, No one yet. He nodded, eyes wide with the kind of worry you don't fake. By Friday, I had 5 different messages, each one anonymous, each one saying the same thing in a different voice. You're still the one we trust. They didn't need to say it out loud. They were watching, and I wasn't invisible. Not to them. That's when I realized Harper may have the microphone, but I still had the room. The following Monday, Harper called for a company-wide strategy sync. Mandatory attendance, standing room only. It was the kind of presentation you could tell she'd practiced in front of a mirror. Tight outfit, perfect hair, pacing just enough to look dynamic, slides with bold fonts and inspirational phrases that meant very little if you actually understood how the company ran. She opened with Stratosyn is entering a new era. Bold, agile future. Faced me, I sat in the second row, arms folded silent. Behind me, I could feel its small shifts in posture, fidgeting. Eyes flicking back toward where I sat. They weren't looking for permission. They were looking for certainty. The presentation rolled on brand refresh, departmental streamlining culture, recalibration. All the buzzwords. None of the substance. She gestured toward a chart showing efficiency goals, but the numbers were fluff. Someone in the back cleared their throat. Someone else adjusted their chair. By the time she hit slide 12, something about value synergy drivers, the room had gone flat, and then it happened. She ended with a wide smile and a hopeful, "Any questions?" Silence. No applause, no reaction, just eyes, and not on her, they were on me. I felt them not in a triumphant way, but in a way that made my chest tighten. It wasn't about recognition. It was about anchoring. These people were scanning the room looking for someone to believe, and whether I wanted it or not. They chose me. Harper didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she pretended not to. "Great," she said, trying to sound upbeat. "Let's move forward with confidence." A few people nodded out of habit, but the energy never returned. After the meeting, as people filtered out, several lingered, just enough to walk near me, not to speak, just to make eye contact. A few small nods, a slight squeeze on the arm, a subtle kind of solidarity. I walked slowly back to my office, not smiling, not rushing. When I got there, a new note was waiting on my desk. "Don't leave. We're not ready for her." It wasn't signed, didn't need to be, because I recognized the handwriting. It belonged to someone I'd hired 8 years ago, someone who now held a title higher than mine, and yet still chose to write this instead of speak it. I slid the note beside the first one. I wasn't naive. I knew where this was headed. Harper had the structure, the PR, the name, but I had something harder to quantify, something you can't download or assign or build into a slide deck. I had loyalty, and in a place like Stratosyn, where code changes daily, but trust takes years, that kind of power doesn't fade, it waits. And when the moment comes, it moves. The house was still. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, brushing against the windows like a whisper. Inside, the only light came from the soft glow of my laptop screen and the cursor blinking on a half-written email I wasn't sure I'd ever send. Then my phone rang, 11:03 p.m. Blocked number. My stomach tightened. I didn't recognize it, but something told me to answer Eva. The voice was familiar, rougher than usual, slurred at the edges, Doug. I said, surprised. He exhaled, a long, tired breath. "Yeah, sorry. I know it's late." There was music in the background, glass clinking. Faint laughter that sounded like it belonged to someone else's life. I just needed to talk to someone who remembers. I stayed silent, letting him come to it in his own time. "I didn't want this," he said finally. "Not like this." His words dropped like stones. "What part?" I asked gently. "The erasure or the silence?" He gave a bitter chuckle. "You always had a way of cutting right through the noise. Then maybe you should have listened before things got this loud." There was a pause. Not angry, just sad, I know. Harper's not. You, he said. But the board wanted someone young, someone fresh. They said we needed a face for the next chapter. And you agreed, I replied. Not accusing, just placing the truth where it belonged. I didn't think it would look like this, he said quietly. You cut out of the history. People scared to say your name in meetings. Systems cracking beneath the surface because they weren't built to be shiny, I said. They were built to hold. He didn't respond. Instead, I heard the soft clink of a glass. Then his voice again, lower now. Raw. I remember the night you stayed until 4 a.m. to rebuild that server from scratch. I remember you flying to Colorado with nothing but a carry-on and a backup drive to save our biggest client. I remember Patrice calling you the fix behind my back and me being proud she did. I closed my eyes. Then why erase it, Doug? I asked quieter now. Why let it happen? His breath hitched slightly because I was tired, because Harper had momentum, because I thought maybe she could carry it forward. Maybe she can, I said, but she's not carrying what matters. He was silent again. Then I miss when we built things together. That version of you would have fought for this company, I said. The version now, just handed it off like a suitcase. A beat passed. Then his voice broke through again, softer than before. I don't know how to fix it. You don't, I said without cruelty. Not anymore. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just sat in that truth the way only someone who's lost something before, realizing it was gone, can sit. It's not about the company, Doug, I added. It's about you forgetting who kept it alive. Another silence. This one deeper. Good night, Doug, I said. Go home. Sober up, tomorrow's still coming. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it, because this wasn't a conversation about redemption. It was a reckoning. I ended the call, placing the phone face down beside me. For a while, I just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the night. Doug was unraveling, not publicly, not yet, but I could hear it in his voice. The exhaustion, the regret, the slow recognition that the company he once controlled was now slipping beyond his reach, and he had no idea how to stop it. I, on the other hand, knew exactly what was happening. Doug had once been a leader, a builder, a flawed but driven man who used to fight tooth and nail for survival. But now, he was a shadow sitting in boardrooms. He no longer commanded, letting his daughter rewrite everything with soft words and sharp edits. He had lost his grip, and in that moment, I realized something simple and terrifying. Doug wasn't in charge anymore, and Harper bright, confident. Harper wasn't nearly as ready as she thought she was, which meant Stratosin was floating, unanchored, unwatched, unprotected. Except for me, by the time morning arrived, Doug's voice was still echoing faintly in my head. Not the words, but the tone, tired, resigned, distant. He was drifting, and in his absence, Harper was steering a ship she didn't understand through waters she'd never studied. I couldn't afford to wait for them to crash into something, so I started laying out my own map. The first step was legal. At 9:14 a.m., I drafted a message to Melissa Tron, an IP attorney I'd worked with quietly over the years. She wasn't flashy, that's why I trusted her. The subject line was simple: System Architecture, Origin and Protection. In the body, I laid out the tools, frameworks, and logic trees I'd developed, some in the early days of Stratosin, some in my private time, long before the company even had formal teams. I attached sketches, prototype screenshots, commit logs, dated documentation. Proof not just of authorship, but of authorship independent of company resources. It wasn't about being vindictive. It was about drawing a line. Melissa replied within the hour. We'll start the filings today. You own more than they think. The next move was just as quiet but louder in implication. I sent a sealed notice to the board. No dramatic language, no demands, just a factual bullet point summary. My 5% ownership stake in Stratosin granted via formal equity agreement in 2003. The clause that prevents major structural changes, including executive transitions, without unanimous board approval, if a voting stakeholder exceeds 3%. A formal record of all restructuring discussions I'd been excluded from a reminder. Ignoring this would constitute breach of original governance contracts. I ended the message with 2 lines. I am not obstructing change. I am protecting foundation. No signatures, no threats. Just clarity. By noon, I was reviewing system migration charts when my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Doug. It was an assistant from Technova. Mr. Renner can meet today. Casual lunch, 1:30. Perfect, I said, just a conversation Technova had been circling for a while. Their growth was fast, their reach aggressive. They'd sniffed around Stratosyn's analytics division more than once, and while I wasn't looking to burn anything down, I also wasn't going to sit quietly while someone else played with matches. We met at a quiet bistro just a few blocks from headquarters. Daniel Renner, CEO of Technova, arrived precisely on time. Calm, confident, and wearing that polite, unreadable expression only seasoned executives have mastered. Eva, he said, shaking my hand. I've heard a great deal about you, I smiled. I imagine not all of it flattering, he laughed. Depends on who's doing the talking. The waiter came and went. We ordered light, unobtrusive dishes. So he said, "What's on your mind?" Nothing official, I said, just lunch. But off the record, I leaned in slightly. You've been watching Stratosyn's transition. He nodded. We have, and I asked. You already know. He said, you wouldn't have called if you didn't. I looked down at my fork. They're streamlining, but not intelligently. Replacing architecture with optics, he said. Exactly. He paused. What are you looking for, Eva? Leverage, I said. Not for war, for balance. His eyes didn't blink. Are you offering access? I shook my head. I'm offering context, what you choose to do with it. Is your play? He smiled faintly. Well played. When I got back to the office, everything looked the same. People moving between meetings. Voices rising and falling behind closed doors. But something had changed, not around me, within me, because now I wasn't bracing for impact, I was building it. My legal protections were in motion. My equity rights were documented and positioned, and the most powerful competitor in the sector had just been given a glimpse of Stratosyn's fractures from someone who knew exactly where they were. I didn't want destruction. That was never my style. But if they tried to push me out completely, they wouldn't be pushing against silence anymore. They'd be pushing against steel that night as I reviewed the last of the old vendor contracts in my home office. I thought about something Doug said during his call. I don't know how to fix it. He meant the company. But what he didn't realize was that it wasn't broken. It was just being hollowed out from the inside by people who mistook heritage for dead weight. And as long as I had breath in me, they weren't going to bury the foundation I built. The boardroom was colder than usual. Not from the air conditioning. From the anticipation, everyone was already seated when I arrived, executive team legal observers. A few senior department heads, and at the far end of the polished walnut table, 3 representatives from Technova. Among them was Daniel Renner. Calm, collected, reading. The room the way a surgeon studies vital signs before making the first cut. Doug sat near the head of the table, but he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, shrinking into the fabric of his blazer like it could shield him from what was coming. And Harper. She sat straight, jaw tight, flipping through a leather-bound notebook she hadn't written a single useful thing in. She avoided my gaze. The meeting opened with a brief statement from Celeste, the chair of the board. Her tone was clipped but neutral. As you all know, this emergency session was called to address internal concerns regarding Stratosyn's leadership transition, operational stability, and legal compliance. We've received documentation from Eva Carter, founding team member, and active equity holder that merits formal review. She turned to me, Eva. The floor is yours. I stood. Not rushed, not defensive, just steady. I'm not here to dismantle anything, I began. I'm here because for the last 2 decades, I poured everything I had into Stratosin. And somewhere along the way, that became invisible, I paused, meeting each face around the table. In this folder, I said, holding it up, are records confirming my 5% ownership stake, which includes voting rights. The board's unanimous consent is required for major structural changes affecting equity stakeholders over 3%. That has not been honored. A rustle of movement. A few exchanged glances. I placed a second folder on the table. This one contains a formal cease and desist regarding the unauthorized reuse of proprietary systems. I developed some of which predate Stratosin's first funding round. These assets were reused in Harper Donnelly's proposed system overhaul, without my knowledge or permission. Harper shifted in her seat, but said nothing. I turned toward Daniel. And finally, I met with Technova's executive team last week. Not to sell, but to share context. Their potential acquisition depends on continuity, legal soundness, and actual infrastructure knowledge. Celeste nodded. Daniel folded his hands. Technova has been evaluating Stratosin as a potential acquisition for months. Based on current documentation, client retention reports, and what we've learned today, I can confirm this. We are still interested. However, he paused. Our offer is contingent upon a clear, competent leadership structure that includes systems integrity, institutional memory, and trust from internal stakeholders. His eyes moved slowly toward Harper. And as of now, we do not believe the current transition plan supports those conditions. Silence. Harper's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Doug let out a breath like he'd been holding it for hours. He didn't look up. Celeste glanced around the room, then said, "We'll take a 10-minute recess." The shuffle of chairs was nearly silent. No one made eye contact. No one spoke except Harper. As we stepped out into the hallway, she turned to me. Her voice was low, shaking slightly. "You blindsided me." I tilted my head. "You erased me." "I didn't." She started but stopped herself. I gave her a small, tired smile. "You stood on a foundation you didn't understand, Harper. And you started swinging a hammer. What did you think would happen?" She didn't reply, just stared past me, as if looking for a version of this day that had gone differently. 10 minutes passed. We returned. Celeste stood again. Effective immediately, she announced, Harper Donnelly is relieved of all transition leadership responsibilities. Doug Donnelly will remain in an advisory capacity through the acquisition process. Then she turned to me. Eva Carter will serve as interim advisor to the board and act as lead consultant to Technova for all system-related transitions, integrations, and retention planning. I didn't smile. I just nodded. Quietly, calmly. Because this wasn't triumph. It was restoration. And after weeks of silence, exclusion, and deletion, my voice had finally landed where it was meant to. Not in the spotlight, but in the structure. The room was still when we returned, not the kind of stillness that follows chaos. The kind that comes after something inevitable has finally landed. People took their seats more carefully now. The chairs didn't squeak. No one shuffled papers or checked their watches. They all knew the moment had arrived. Harper sat 2 seats from me, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. She kept her eyes locked on a spot just past the projector screen, like if she stared hard enough, she could make this all disappear. Doug looked even smaller than before, pale tired. Like a man finally understanding the weight of what he'd allowed to unfold, Celeste rose from her chair with a calm that could only be described as final. "We've had our discussion," she began. And the board has reached a unanimous decision regarding the current state of leadership, operational integrity, and acquisition readiness. She didn't look at Harper when she said the next part. She didn't need to. Effective immediately. Harper Donnelly is relieved of all transition leadership duties. Her role will revert to advisory only, pending further review. Harper flinched barely, but to her credit, she didn't argue. Doug closed his eyes briefly. A small motion, a quiet acceptance, Doug Donnelly. Celeste continued, will remain as a temporary advisor through the acquisition period, supporting high-level negotiations and legacy knowledge transfer. Doug nodded slowly, finally meeting her gaze. Then she turned toward me. And Eva Carter will lead the Transitional Advisory Group, reporting directly to the board and to Technova's integration team. She will serve as the primary consultant on all matters related to core systems process stability and long-term institutional continuity. The words weren't loud, they didn't need to be. They landed with the weight of something earned, not gifted, not inherited, earned. There was no applause, no congratulatory backpats or high fives. Just silence. But this time, it wasn't the silence of dismissal. It was acknowledgement. I nodded once. That was enough. After the meeting, I walked the long hallway back to my office. People passed me without saying much, but their eyes said plenty. A few subtle nods. One quiet. Thank you from someone in legal I hadn't spoken to in weeks. When I stepped into my office, I didn't sit. Not right away. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out over the city, the same view I'd had for years. But today it felt different, like the glass had been cleaned, like the noise had finally dulled into something. I could hear myself think through again. I turned back to my desk and pulled out a small black notebook, the one I kept buried in the second drawer. It wasn't for to-do lists or project updates, just names. Names of people who stayed, who helped, who remembered. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote one more down Celeste. Then I wrote another, Daniel Renair. And at the bottom, underlined softly, the ones who looked back. Because that was the truth. Wasn't it? This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about being seen, about not letting years of work get scrubbed clean because someone younger had a brighter smile and louder slogans. It was about reminding people that there are voices that don't shout, but they build. And when you strip away the noise, the company still stands on their foundation. I finally sat down and opened my email. A message from Daniel was already waiting. Looking forward to working with you. The hard part is done. Now we rebuild. I typed back. We don't rebuild, we reinforce. The structure was always there. I hit send, then leaned back in my chair. The room was quiet, but not empty. Because now, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone in it. Across the hall, Harper's office door was closed. I didn't need to go in. I didn't need to check on her. That part wasn't mine to carry. She would face her own silence now, the kind I'd lived in for months. The difference was, she'd have to learn what I already knew. Being heard isn't about volume, it's about value. And when you strip away the branding, value is all that remains. 2 months later, Stratocene officially became part of Technova. No fireworks. No press release fanfare. Just a smooth, silent transfer, like a baton passed between runners who already know the rhythm. I didn't return to the office. That chapter was closed. These days, I work remotely. A small converted study overlooking the lake where the morning light spills across the floor in quiet waves. Twice a week, I sit on the porch barefoot, sipping coffee, while client dashboards load smoothly on my screen. They run on systems I designed years ago, quietly, methodically, meant to last through storms, upgrades, and even egos I never asked for credit. I just built things to hold. Last week, I received an email from Celeste, the board chair. Short, unembellished. But it stayed with me, Eva. You didn't just protect your legacy. You reminded everyone that real leadership doesn't need to shout. I read it twice, then smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd been seen. The funny thing about systems is, they remember even when people don't. Some victories don't come with applause, just quiet recognition. And sometimes, that's the most powerful sound of all. Have you ever been pushed aside only to prove your worth in silence? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. If the story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Just like this one, because some voices don't need volume, just the right moment to be heard.